Our second reading of the day is from the letter to the church in Rome, chapter 1, verses 8 through 16. And as you think about Paul's writings, they are often in those first verses greetings to that church as he thinks about his relationship with the church. And in many ways, I feel a real affinity with this gospel, with this letter, as I come to you as the Presbyter for Vision and Mission, this sense that I'm coming to you from a particular journey that I have had, and now I have a chance to share that with you, just as you share your faith with me. So please listen now for the Spirit of God in this reading. First, I want to thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed throughout the world. For God, whom I serve with my spirit by announcing the gospel of his Son, is my witness, that without ceasing I remember you always in my prayers, asking that by God's will I may somehow at last succeed in coming to you. For I am longing to see you so that I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, or rather, so that we may mutually be encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as I have among the rest of the Gentiles. I am a debtor, both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. Hence, my eagerness to proclaim the gospel to you also who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. May God bless the reading of the word. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of salvation to all those who have faith, or all those who believe. Every time I read that particular passage, I remember a particular group I was part of when I first went to college in 1979. And I grew up in the Presbyterian church, but I ended up in sort of a campus crusade kind of group for the first few months. And one of the things that I remember is that we would gather together usually once a week, and we would encourage each other's faith so that we could go out and share the gospel with the other students on campus. And one of the things that I remember that we did is we would sing this little chorus that comes from Romans 1:16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of salvation to all those who believe. And it would just be that, and it would repeat over and over again, and we would get louder and louder as we sung it, and then we would raise it a half of a step each time, and you could feel that it was moving into a little bit of a fever pitch as we geared ourselves up so that we would have the strength and the courage to go out to the campus and share this gospel with others. I think that's probably when I first intuitively began to realize that I was Presbyterian. Because I enjoyed singing the song with them. I enjoyed our digging into the scriptures once a week. I enjoyed the fellowship that we shared. I also really enjoyed the dedication that they had to the scriptures and to their faith. But once they walked out the doors, I stood by the sidelines and watched them share their faith. 3 or 4 months ago, when I was asked whether I would preach and what might I want to do with this time if I was asked, I said, well, maybe it's time to think a little bit about our vision and where we are going, because that is my role as the Presbyter for Vision and Mission. And I thought about this text from Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. And as I said that, I thought that's where I may land on for this particular service. One of the worship leaders said, well, while you're using the language of being not ashamed, maybe we can find the positive side of that and talk about how we are proud of the gospel, or how we feel good about the gospel, or how we are delighted in the gospel, or excited about the gospel. And I am glad that the worship design team landed on the more positive side of this language. Rather than not being ashamed, how are we actually proud of the gospel? And I'm glad that they landed there, because it's going to balance me out a little bit. Because I actually want to settle a little bit more on this language of not being ashamed. Now, I want to be very clear that in no ways do I feel that we as Presbyterians are ashamed of our gospel. I've been doing this work, I've been in the church now for 51, 52 years, and I have a deep amount of pride in who we are and what we do. And when I think about the work of our churches and the faith that is among us, the faith that we take out to our neighborhoods and to the world, and our missions and the way we care for each other, I'm deeply proud of who we are and what we do. I would no way be able to do this work if I didn't have a deep sense of pride in who we are. And yet, I think there's just enough truth in this language where I am not ashamed of the gospel, but I think it's worth a sermon. For on the one hand, while I don't think we ever get to the point of being ashamed of the gospel, when it comes to sharing the gospel, when I think about my evangelical friends in college, when it comes to actually sharing the gospel, we Presbyterians can be a little bit shy, sometimes a little bit timid, maybe a little bit cautious, and even wary about going out into the streets and meeting with strangers and sharing the gospel. And there's actually good reason for this. Because of who we are, because of the kind of faith that we have a deep respect for other people and their values and their faith. And so when you meet somebody on the street and they have that little brochure of the 5-step plan for salvation, it doesn't ring quite right for us oftentimes. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago, and those of us who were there were all pretty theologically astute. We've been in this work for many, many years, and this one woman raised an encounter she had just a few days before this, where somebody on the street, a complete stranger, had come up to her and had asked her, was she saved? Well, she took it as an occasion to be a little playful. And so she said, well, saved from what? And he began to describe, well, saved from being a sinner, and saved from all the bad things that we do, and saved so that we won't spend eternity in hell, but we can actually spend eternity in heaven. And where he was trying to go was to get her to the place that she would admit that she was a sinner. That was the easy part, he thought, so that he could finally get to the punchline at the end and have her accept Jesus Christ as her Savior. But she just didn't fall for it, and she kept pushing back, saying, well, she didn't really see herself as a sinner. Now, I know her well enough to know that she is deeply theological, astute, and has a deep theology of understanding of the sinfulness, but she just wasn't going to go for the meat on this one, and he walked away frustrated that he couldn't even get her to acknowledge her sin. Probably more closer to home for me a few years ago, I was at the memorial service for my stepmother, a beautiful service that reflected her life and her faith, and then toward the very end of the service, the preacher got up and made an altar call for all those who were there with my stepmother's body there, and asked if anybody was ready to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior before God called them home as well. And this might be their last chance. Now, if you knew my stepmother, you would actually discover that this was actually a good reflection of her life. This is what she believed, and it would have been one of the best ways to honor her. But sitting next to me was my 22-year-old son, who was raised in the Presbyterian church, and is one of those millennials who has left the church. And after the service, he was red in the face. He was absolutely aghast and offended that the preacher would use his grandmother's service as an opportunity to make an altar call. And that's why I say that yes, there's a bit of shyness and wariness about going out and sharing our faith with complete strangers based on who we are as deeply Reformed Presbyterians. And it's based on some experiences, the way our culture is, and the way Christians are often portrayed in our culture and in our community. We have a wariness because we don't want to find ourselves associated with those who may actually disrespect the relationship between one person and another, and be tolerant of the diversity of those around us because our agenda is simply to get them to say certain words. But I also think that maybe we lose just a little bit. Maybe the continuum has swung too far. Because I think also in our attempts to not be offensive, to always be tolerant, to make sure to honor the other person, deep biblical values, Presbyterian values, but in our attempt to go that far, I think we also sometimes run the risk of keeping the gospel to ourselves, of holding the good news that we have experienced and that we know right here among us, holding it in just within the confines of our churches and our congregations. That we run the risk, as Matthew says, of hiding the light of God's salvation under a bushel. We do have a story. Our lives have been transformed. We are who we are because of the connections that we have here and the faith that we have. And I've been out in the community enough to know that there are people hurting and needing that story and needing what we have. Lives they're desperately seeking to be transformed, to take despair and move it into hope. People who are feeling lonely and isolated and would die to be part of this sense of belonging that we share here in our congregations. You know, one of the things I have noticed is that when it comes to meeting with strangers, we are more likely to talk about that new great Thai restaurant in town or the more recent Blazers success than we are actually to share the experience of a moving and powerful sermon on a Sunday, or the experience of having a really tough week or month and coming into worship and having a congregation pray for you and hold you and listen to your story and accept you for who you are. To be able to talk about that sense of belonging that we feel here once we walk inside of these doors and meet fellow Presbyterians on the road. Or the stories we have of our opportunities to serve and to share the riches of our faith as we reach out to the disenfranchised and the vulnerable. And this is where I think Matthew may give us a bit of a clue in how it is that we share our faith. How it is that we both are tolerant and honor the lives and values and the beliefs of other people, while also honoring what we know to be true in our own lives. And it comes in this one question that Jesus asks of the disciples. He says, "Who do you say that I am?" And I want to put a little emphasis on the word "you," because he's already asked, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they give the answer, John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, probably one of the prophets. And then Jesus turns to them and says, "But who do you Who do you say that I am? And I think what's powerful about that is we have to remember that the disciples are his intimate followers and friends. In other words, when he asks the question, who do you say that I am? In other words, who do you who have walked with me? Who do you who have broken bread with me? Who do you who have struggled with me? Who do you who have sat with me with 5,000 families and taught and shared and struggled and learned? Who do you who have taken this journey with me? Who do you say that I am? And those who know Jesus the best and most intimately say, ah, wow, I know you. You're the Son of God. You're the Messiah. Who do you? Not who is Jesus, but who do you who know him most intimately say that he is? And this is where I'm going to give you a little bit of an opportunity to know me, because it's one of the questions that I have asked myself over the years. In many ways, I feel really lucky that my particular story made it easy to answer this question. Maybe only a handful of you know, but those who have been around me long enough know that I'm the child of a teenage mother who left our family when I was just 3 years old. And there was a lot of chaos in my family for the first 6 years. My dad, this is in 1962, tried to figure out how to be a single dad. And I was moved around to a grandmother in California, my sister and I, aunts and uncles and cousins in Wyoming, a grandpa in Pony, Montana. There were some pretty chaotic years when my dad tried to recover from the loss of his wife and my mother. Things finally stabilized when I was about 6 years old. My dad got his degree in engineering. We moved to Loveland, Colorado, and when I was in second grade, my dad and his second wife began taking me and my sister to the Presbyterian church in Loveland, Colorado. But 2 years later, something happened that some of you might remember. There was a little situation called the Angela Davis controversy. And so 2 years after we were plopped down in the Presbyterian church, my parents left the church. And it's amazing for me now to look back 40-some years later and see the impact of the church in my life. But my sister and I, without any prodding at all from our parents, continued to walk the 1.5 miles to church every Sunday and then into our junior high and senior high years. We could not have articulated it at the time, but we felt more a sense of family and belonging and acceptance in the church than we did in the family where we had 3-bedroom home, 2 parents, but there was definitely something missing. All the chaos of those earlier years had taken its toll. And somehow my sister and I knew that it was the church where we were going to have family. And so in many ways, I feel like one of the lucky ones because it's been easy to answer the question. Jesus Christ through the church literally saved me. About 15 years ago, I was doing foster care and probation work with youth who were coming out of the Oregon Youth Authority. And do you know why I did it? Because when I looked at those kids who were coming out of the Oregon Youth Authority, I said, I know you. Because I was almost one of them. If it had not been for the love of the church and that sense of belonging and people caring for me and listening for me and understanding the struggles that I had, I would not be here today. I'm not sure exactly where I'd be. Maybe there'd be a chaplain in prison who would be visiting me. Maybe I would be lost and lonely. I don't know exactly where I'd be, but I can tell you for sure I wouldn't be standing in this pulpit today. My friends, it's people like you, and I say this with no irony at all, save me. The church saved me. God working through you made all the difference in my life. And that's where I think this question from Jesus gets to the heart of this. He didn't ask the question, who am I? Right? He asked two questions. Well, who do other people say that I am? And then who do you say that I am? And one of the wonderful things for me in doing this work is that whether I am in the church or I'm working with foster families, I've been able to tell the same story. That it's because of the people of the church that I'm here today. And when I used to do motivational speaking with foster families, I used to tell them that if you could have the same kind of presence with these foster children as the church had with me, there's a fighting chance that they're going to make it. You see, I had no need to be shy about the gospel because this is my story. It's not just the story I tell here on Sunday mornings or Saturday mornings. It's the story I tell when I'm out there because it is my story. It's who I am. It's what God has done in my life. I've titled the sermon Where God's Story Meets Our Story. And I love that particular image because I am a student of the Bible and I love reading the Bible. But in some ways it can be a little bit locked into history if we're not careful. You see, the sparks really start to fly, not just when you read the Bible, but when you know the story of the Bible well enough and you know your own story well enough, and then you begin to see where the two come together. That's when the sparks begin to fly. That when you could tell God's story through your story, that's when the incarnation takes place. That's when Jesus shows up in our lives. That's when he begins to jump off the pages of the Bible and come alive. Not only in our congregations, but in each single person who is sitting here today. I want to share with you a video that kind of gets to the heart of this as well, and I'll just end with a couple closing statements, but this is a video I have used a couple times with sessions as they think about their future and about their mission. It's been a highly effective video for working with church leaders, and I would love to share it with you as well. It's from a series called Break Time. Steve, I think ready?
The series is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how do I know, the next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, can you sing? And then I'm just going to show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
Sorry, I have to dress again. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was singing. The second time, he knew why. He knew why he was singing it. And you can see the amazing difference that happened when we know the why. When we know why we are here, when we know why we are preaching, when we know why we are reaching out to the people around us, when we know why we are praying for each other and caring for each other, something happens. The Spirit begins to take over. What I want to share with you as the new Presbyter for Vision and Mission is, as I'm going around to our congregations, I'm hearing a lot of what questions. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do for the future? How are we going to get from here to here? And what I want to tell you is that in every single meeting that I can, I'm going to try to remind you to ask the question, why? Why are we doing this? Why are you in this location, in this particular part of the city? Why has your faith been so powerful for you and changed your life? Why and why and why? For the more that we can get to the bottom of the whys, the more we're going to understand what to do. I'm going to ask you just to take 30 seconds in silence and answer that question for yourself. Why are you in church? Why do you have your faith? Why are you following Jesus?